A black man in a $5,000 suit just got served a moldy bread roll by a flight attendant who didn't even look him in the eye. Elijah Brooks hadn't slept in 26 hours. Between closing a billion-dollar software merger and fielding questions from skeptical investors, his body screamed for rest. But for now, he was on Sky Vista Flight 719, sliding into his first-class seat with the kind of calm that only came from a decade of boardrooms and battles. Seat 2, it had a window seat, a place to breathe. He wore a tailored navy suit, Italian leather shoes, and a Cartier timepiece that shimmered under the cabin lights. His passport bore stamps from 42 countries. His net worth hovered just above $400 million. But none of that mattered to the flight attendant who greeted him, or didn't. Seat 2A, she said flatly, without making eye contact. Her name tag read Hannah. Blonde, mid-30s. Her smile had been radiant for the white couple ahead of him. Her voice had softened when speaking to the man in seat 1C. But for Elijah, just a dismissive glance and a finger point that he gave a small nod, said thank you, and sat down. No fuss. No confrontation, but he noticed, and he filed it away. As the plane taxied down the runway, Elijah plugged in his noise-canceling headphones. He wasn't a man who expected pampering, but he did expect dignity. And the undercurrent of disinterest from Hannah wasn't just cold. It was calculated. She passed by twice without acknowledging him. No pre-departure drink. No minued. No smile. Elijah closed his eyes, exhaled slowly, and reminded himself, pick your battles. You're here to get home. But fate had a different plan, because soon, this wasn't going to be just another flight. Elijah hadn't been expecting luxury, despite what the price tag of his ticket implied. He simply wanted respect when the meal cart finally rolled back around. Nearly 20 minutes after the rest of the cabin had been served, he closed his laptop and folded his hands, waiting. Hannah didn't offer a menu. She didn't ask for his preference. She simply placed a tray in front of him with a thud. There you go, she said, already turning away. Elijah looked down at it first. He blinked, unsure if his eyes were deceiving him. The bread roll had dark green patches curling around the edges. The chicken breast was gray, its juices pooling beneath wilted carrots that smelled off. The potatoes looked like they'd been sitting out for hours. He leaned in slightly. The sour stench confirmed it. This food wasn't just unappetizing. It was spoiled. He looked up calmly and called out, "Excuse me." Hannah turned, visibly annoyed. "Yes. This meal seems to be expired," Elijah said, choosing his words with restraint. "The bread is moldy. The vegetables. It's what's being served," she interrupted sharply, her voice loud enough for a few heads to turn. The woman across the aisle, a white woman in a pearl necklace, frowned. "That's strange," she said, eyeing her own tray. "Mine's perfectly fine." Hannah crossed her arms. "Well, some people are just more sensitive." Elijah raised an eyebrow. That word again. Sensitive. He wasn't angry, he wasn't shocked, but he was insulted, not because of the food, but because of what it symbolized. Everyone else had received quality. He got the leftovers, the discarded tray, the bare minimum, served cold, with a side of contempt. And the worst part? It wasn't the first time that he reached down slowly and took out his phone. Not to film, not to tweet, but to document. Not the meal, not the tray. The moment. The injustice wasn't loud, but it was real. He opened his secured business app, composed a message, and typed swiftly, "Flight 719. Served visibly moldy meal in first class. Attendant Hannah unprofessional and dismissive. Racial bias likely. Please escalate immediately." He sent it directly to David Kim, Vice President of Corporate Operations at Sky Vista Airlines, a longtime colleague, and a man who didn't tolerate nonsense. Then Elijah calmly placed his phone face down on the tray and turned toward the window that he wouldn't give Hannah the satisfaction of a scene. But he had just set the wheels in motion. Minutes passed. Hannah didn't return. The rest of the cabin returned to their movies and champagne. Elijah pushed the tray away, unopened. The man behind him whispered, "I saw what happened, man. That wasn't right." Elijah nodded once, but didn't turn around. He'd spent a lifetime walking tightropes like this. One step too loud, and he was aggressive. One protest too visible, and he was entitled. So he learned to respond with silence and power. And this time, he was bringing both. By the time the cabin lights dimmed, Elijah hadn't touched the tray. The moldy bread sat untouched, like a quiet insult. The gray chicken glistened under the faint orange glow from the reading light above his seat. No apology came, no replacement. Not even a glance. Hannah passed through the cabin twice after that. Once to check on the couple in seats 1A and 1B, offering them extra drinks and pillows, and once to take away trays. When she reached Elijah's row, she paused. "You didn't eat?" Elijah looked up, eyes steady. "No." She tilted her head slightly, lips pursed. "Well, if you'd like something else, you can purchase snacks from economy." It wasn't just dismissive, it was condescending. "You're suggesting I go back to Coach to buy crackers?" he asked quietly. "It's what's available," she said with a shrug. That was the moment something shifted in Elijah's expression. That it wasn't anger, that it was resolve. He reached slowly for the tray, closed it, and handed it back with controlled poise. "Thank you," he said with the same tone a CEO would use to dismiss an underperforming executive. That it wasn't the words, it was the weight behind them. Hannah hesitated. Her hand trembled slightly as she took the tray. She opened her mouth as if to respond, but no words came. She turned and walked away. In the row behind, a young black man in casual clothes leaned forward. "That was cold," he whispered, eyes wide. "Like, powerful cold." Elijah half smiled. "Sometimes that's all it takes." Then he pulled out his phone again, not to text, but to glance at the email notification that had just come in. "We are aware of the situation. Landing team will be present at JFK. Thank you for flagging. David Kim, VP Ops, Sky Vista Airlines." It had begun. For the rest of the flight, Elijah didn't recline his seat. He didn't ask for anything. He sat upright, stoic, while a quiet storm built behind his eyes. This wasn't about food anymore. This was about principle, dignity, and the kind of accountability most people like Hannah never expected, but they were about to. 35 minutes from landing, Elijah had just closed his laptop when Hannah reappeared, this time with a slightly forced smile. "We're beginning our descent into JFK," she said, tone sweetened like syrup that had been sitting too long in the sun. Elijah didn't answer. She lingered. "I trust the rest of your flight was acceptable?" He looked up slowly. There was a silence between them that made the man across the aisle lower his earbuds. "I'm sure I'll have a full review prepared shortly," Elijah said. Not a threat, not loud, but final. She gave a tight nod and disappeared toward the galley. In the flight deck, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Cabin crew, prepare for arrival." Meanwhile, in the front row of coach, two sharply dressed men in dark suits had quietly boarded the aircraft during a layover earlier that day in Denver. Unannounced, unnoticed, they weren't regular passengers. They were Sky Vista Airlines' internal oversight team, specifically dispatched for onboard evaluations at random. Except this one hadn't been random. They had received a priority directive. They knew the name Elijah Brooks, and they were watching everything. 10 minutes before landing, Elijah received another notification. "Landing party confirmed. Please disembark normally. We'll take care of the rest." D. Kim. He tucked the phone into his breast pocket and stared out the window. Below, Manhattan glowed like a galaxy, untouchable, indifferent, sprawling. Inside, Elijah's thoughts were quiet, focused. He wasn't thinking about revenge. He was thinking about all the other times he hadn't spoken up. All the black professionals who had swallowed indignities to avoid being labeled difficult. Not today. Not this time. When the plane touched down with a gentle jolt, the cabin erupted in polite applause. Hannah stood at the front, posture rigid. Elijah was the first to stand. He adjusted his tie, took his bag, turned to the man behind him, and offered a nod. "You stay sharp, young brother," he said. "You too, sir." As Elijah stepped off the plane, two men in suits approached him immediately at the gate, flashing discreet IDs. Hannah, still gathering items at the front, looked up. Her face froze. One of the men spoke into his walkie. "She's still on board." They moved past Elijah, stepping into the jet bridge. Another officer blocked the exit. Hannah's voice cracked. "What is this?" "Ma'am, we need to speak with you." The cabin went silent. And Elijah? He just kept walking. The wheels of Flight 719 kissed the JFK tarmac with a smoothness that betrayed the tension inside the aircraft. For most passengers, the landing was a relief. But for Elijah Brooks, it was the beginning. The plane slowed to a crawl and began taxiing toward Gate 34. Elijah remained seated, fingers gently tapping the leather armrest. His breathing was even. His eyes focused. His heart calm. But he wasn't calm because he was unaffected. He was calm because he was ready. Hannah stood at the front of the cabin, forcing a bright, rehearsed smile. She began the usual disembarkation routine, thanking passengers, reminding them to check overhead bins. But her gaze kept flicking toward 2-8. Elijah stood only when the door clicked open and the jet bridge sealed against the plane. He gathered his bag slowly, adjusted his cuffs, and took a final glance back. He didn't need to say a word. He stepped into the bridge, where 2 men in suits and a woman in corporate uniform waited silently. Their faces were composed, but their posture held intent. "Elijah Brooks?" one of them asked, extending a hand. He nodded. "Mr. Kim sends his regards. We've been briefed." Elijah shook the hand firmly. "Good. I'll let you handle it from here." The woman beside them clicked something on a tablet. "May we escort you to the lounge?" He shook his head. "No need. I have a car waiting. But thank you." He walked off, leaving the 3 behind. Still positioned at the gate. 2 minutes later, the passengers began to trickle off. Hannah walked off last. She didn't make it far. "Miss Hannah Monroe," the corporate woman called out. Hannah froze. Her body turned mechanically. "Yes?" Her voice barely held together. "We'd like a moment of your time." She blinked. "Is something wrong?" Behind her, a few passengers glanced curiously. The woman stepped aside, revealing a security officer now standing quietly nearby. "Just a procedural review," the man in the suit said, based on a report received mid-flight. Hannah's mouth opened slightly, her words catching in her throat. "We'll need you to step into this room here." The officer gestured to a door near the jetway with frosted glass. "This way, please." She followed, her feet heavy. Inside, the room was quiet. A small table, 2 chairs, and a monitor showing real-time internal comms. One of the men turned to her. "Let's start with the service log," he said. I don't understand. I did my job." "You served a visibly spoiled meal to a first-class passenger," the woman said bluntly. "You ignored his concerns, then suggested he buy snacks from economy." Hannah swallowed. "I didn't mean, you also served that meal last. It was not on the primary tray set. It was meant for disposal." Her hands trembled slightly. "No one told me." The woman interrupted. "You're not new, Hannah. And this isn't the first complaint." A long silence filled the room. Then came the sentence that shifted the air. "You do know who that man was, don't you?" Hannah's eyes narrowed. "A passenger?" "He's Elijah Brooks," the man said, "co-founder of one of the largest AI firms in the world. And, more importantly for you, board advisor to our parent company." The room turned cold. Meanwhile, Elijah sat in a sleek black SUV, already pulling away from Terminal 4. He looked out the window as planes passed in the distance. That he didn't smile. This wasn't a victory. It was a correction. A simple moment of accountability in a world where so often people like him were expected to endure in silence. But not today. In a beige conference room tucked behind JFK's Terminal 4, Hannah Monroe sat rigid in a chair that felt colder than steel. Her neatly pressed uniform now clung to her like a burden. The overhead lights buzzed. Her hands, folded in her lap, trembled faintly. Across from her sat 3 people, 2 from Sky Vista Corporate and 1 from HR. The silence in the room was not empty. It pulsed. "We've reviewed the footage," said the woman with the badge clipped to her blazer. "Your service to Mr. Brooks was noticeably inconsistent." I didn't mean anything by it," Hannah replied, her voice too quick. The HR officer raised an eyebrow. "That's a vague defense. I treated him like I treat every passenger." The man on the left leaned forward. "That's simply not true. You greeted everyone else with smiles and offers. You served Mr. Brooks late, gave him food that wasn't cleared for service, and when he expressed concern, you dismissed him." Hannah's heart pounded. "I didn't know who he was." "That," the woman from corporate said, "is not the point." They clicked on a tablet. Footage played. Clip 1. Hannah greeting a white passenger in 1A. "Welcome aboard, sir. Can I get you a drink while we settle in?" Clip 2. Hannah passing Elijah without acknowledgement. Seat 2A. Flatly spoken. Clip 3. Her serving moldy food. Tray dropped unceremoniously. Clip 4. Her reaction to his complaint. The dismissive shrug and sharp tone. And then, Clip 5. Elijah's calm. His restraint. His dignity. And his quiet power. "Your tone toward him changed," the woman said. The way you interacted with him, demeaning, indifferent. You didn't even attempt to fix the problem. I didn't think he was worthy of service, the HR officer interrupted. Is that what you were about to say? Hannah felt heat rise to her face. No, I mean, he just seemed like what? The man asked. Say it. Hannah froze. Like he didn't belong in first class? The woman said. Hannah didn't answer. That silence was louder than any confession. Meanwhile, Elijah sat in a black town car gliding down the Van Wyck Expressway. The city skyline loomed in the distance, but his mind was far from its glitter. He wasn't angry anymore. He was reflective. This wasn't the worst he had faced in corporate America, but it was a symbol of a deeper rot, a daily erosion of dignity disguised as routine. What struck him most wasn't the meal. It was the expectation that he would stay silent, that he would simply endure, but not anymore. His phone buzzed. She's being held for full HR review. We'll keep you updated. D. Kim. Elijah typed back. Ensure this leads to structural change. I'm not interested in token accountability. Understood. Your statement carries full weight. Elijah locked the screen and leaned back. He knew what came next was more important than any apology. It was policy. It was reform. Back at the airport, Hannah was handed a document. Due to the nature of the incident and following internal policy, you are being placed on administrative leave effective immediately, the woman said. There will be a formal review. Your conduct violates both FAA service standards and company equity guidelines. Hannah's lips parted. I made a mistake. No, the man said. You made a choice. They stood. The meeting was over. Back in Manhattan, Elijah Brooks stood before a towering glass wall on the 42nd floor of EtherCore HQ. The sun cast long streaks of gold across the city, but his eyes were not on the skyline. They were on the problem and the opportunity. Let's go over the HR reform proposal again, he said calmly, turning to his chief people officer, Amanda Lee. Amanda, a sharp, no-nonsense strategist, tapped her tablet. We're adding mandatory unconscious bias training for all Sky Vista frontline staff, biannual performance audits, and an anonymous reporting app for in-flight misconduct. Everything will be transparent, measurable, trackable, accountable. Elijah nodded. And consequences? Clear tiers, warnings, suspensions, termination for repeat behavior. We're done protecting comfortably biased employees behind service policies. He let out a breath. Good. This isn't about punishing one person. It's about changing the system that let her feel safe doing what she did. Amanda looked at him. You think she'll try to sue? I hope she does, Elijah said with a quiet smirk. Then we'll have a courtroom conversation about race, power, and what professionalism really means. Meanwhile, back at JFK, Hannah sat alone on a bench in the employee processing lounge. Her badge had been taken, her ID deactivated, her phone vibrated. A message from a fellow flight attendant popped up. He was the CEO. Are you serious? She didn't reply. She scrolled, and then saw it. An anonymous blog post already gaining traction. I watched a black man get served moldy food in first class. Written by the passenger seated behind Elijah. The post didn't name her, but it didn't have to. Every detail was clear. The tone, the tray, the silence. Underneath, hundreds of comments poured in. This happens more than we think. Shout out to him for handling it with class. She should be fired. Period. Imagine being that bold while being that wrong. Her hands shook. Later that night, in Elijah's penthouse study, the city buzzed below like an endless circuit board of ambition and chaos. He sipped ginger tea and reread a draft of his internal memo. Subject: more than a meal, what happened on Flight 719 isn't unique. It's a reflection of a reality we too often ignore. Respect is not a perk. It's a baseline that we will never reach excellence as a company if we allow subtle acts of disrespect to poison our culture from the inside. This is not revenge. This is restoration. Starting today, I'm asking each of you, what would you do if you saw it happen to someone else? Don't be silent. Be the shift. He hit send. 3 days after the incident, Sky Vista Airlines released a public statement that IT was sterile, clinical. We acknowledge a service discrepancy aboard Flight 719 involving a valued customer. Sky Vista does not condone any form of discrimination. Internal investigations are underway. Elijah read it once, then twice. then closed the press release tab. He wasn't angry, just unimpressed that he knew corporate language. This wasn't accountability that IT was shielding. The real apology wasn't in the words, it would be in the actions that followed. That same morning, Sky Vista's CEO, Thomas Ellery, requested a private call with Elijah. They hadn't spoken in over a year. Elijah, Thomas began, his tone clipped. I want to personally apologize. I had no idea you were on that flight. That's part of the problem, Tom. Elijah said, calm but firm. Your team knew how to treat someone when they knew their title. But when they didn't, they served them mold. There was silence on the other end. Elijah, she's on leave. We're reviewing her conduct. HR is working with, spare me the brochure. Elijah interrupted. What are you doing? Thomas exhaled. I'd like to bring you in, permanently, as an executive consultant for culture transformation. Board level. Real influence. Elijah paused. I'm not here for seats or slogans, he said. I'll only help if your house is ready to be gutted. Thomas chuckled nervously. We'll start tearing down walls. Meanwhile, at a small cafe in Queens, Hannah sat across from a lawyer in a charcoal suit. You could claim retaliation, he said. But given his position, you'd lose. Public sympathy isn't with you. She stirred her coffee in silence. This isn't about being right anymore, she whispered. It's about what I did. I didn't just lose a job. I showed my worst self, and it's on display forever. The lawyer closed his folder. Then you know what needs to happen. Later that week, Elijah received a handwritten letter on heavy cream stationery that IT began. Mr. Brooks, I don't expect you to forgive me. But I need to say this. It was from Hannah. 3 pages. No excuses. No justification. Just reflection. She spoke of upbringing. Blind spots. How she had been trained for efficiency, not empathy. How that day changed her. And how she couldn't stop thinking about the look in his eyes when he returned the tray, not with rage, but with quiet disappointment. At the end, she wrote. I now understand what it means to serve and how little I did it that day. I can't undo it, but I'm working to be someone who never does it again. Elijah folded the letter slowly and set it aside. That he didn't respond, but he saved it. The next month, Sky Vista Airlines convened an emergency executive board meeting at their headquarters in Atlanta. The usual pleasantries were skipped. Seated at the long oak table were 12 board members, each representing different divisions of the company, from logistics to marketing to investor relations. And at the head of the table, unusually calm, sat Thomas Ellery. The CEO. To his right was Elijah Brooks. He hadn't come as a guest. He came as an agent of change. I assume you've all seen the numbers, Thomas began. Since Flight 719 went viral, customer feedback scores have dropped 13%. Hashtags are trending. Employees are rattled. But more importantly, Elijah added, our brand has been unmasked. People now see what many have experienced, but few could prove. A culture of quiet bias that festers behind professionalism. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Elijah stood. I'm not here for revenge, he said. I'm here because we have an opportunity, a rare one, to prove to the public, to our teams, and to the industry that we don't just care about profit. We care about people. He clicked the remote. A slide appeared on the screen. Operation Elevate, a culture rebuilt from the inside. He outlined the plan. Mandatory bias and de-escalation training for all customer-facing staff. Real-time reporting app available in flight for both passengers and crew. Promotion audits to eliminate gatekeeping based on fit over merit. Quarterly diversity reports reviewed by an independent third party. And most crucially, a new executive role, Chief Equity Officer, reporting directly to the board. The room was quiet until an older board member cleared his throat. Elijah, do you really think this will matter? We've survived scandals before. Passengers forget. Elijah looked directly at him. Passengers forget what was posted, not how they were treated. That landed. After the meeting, Thomas caught up with Elijah in the hallway. You're not the same man I met 3 years ago. I wasn't allowed to be, Elijah replied. Now I make the rules. Thomas smiled weakly. If I'd known what that flight would cost me. Elijah stopped walking. You gained more than you lost. You just haven't seen it yet. The reforms rolled out over the next 90 days. Hundreds of staff were retrained. New hires came from unexpected places. Community colleges, HBCUs, immigrant job pipelines. That Hannah's role wasn't filled. But a new team was built. With the right mindset, in-flight announcements were rewritten. Tone shifted. Service reports improved. And on a flight to Chicago, a young black passenger seated in 1A was greeted by name with a warm smile and asked, "Would you prefer sparkling or still water, Mr. Daniels?" He blinked in surprise that it was the first time he'd ever heard his name said first, not last. 3 months later, Elijah was walking through JFK Airport when a young man in a crisp Navy uniform approached him. Early 20s. Nervous smile. "Mr. Brooks?" Elijah turned. "Yes?" The young man straightened his tie. "I'm part of the new Sky Vista intake. You spoke at our training last week." Elijah gave a slight smile. "Right. I remember your question about accountability." The man nodded. "I just wanted to say, your story changed everything. The way we serve, the way we see people. You made us understand that the smallest disrespect can cost the biggest trust." Elijah looked at him carefully, then offered his hand. "You're not just a server," he said. "You're a gatekeeper of dignity. Remember that." The young man shook his hand, beaming. Later, on his flight to San Francisco, Elijah sat by the window again. Seat 2A. This time, the service was warm. The attendant, a woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair, placed his meal gently in front of him. "Everything here was double-checked," she said. "And if it's not perfect, I'll fix it before you even ask." He looked down. The tray was immaculate. The bread warm. The vegetables crisp. The service? Sincere. For the first time in a long while, Elijah felt seen. He took a bite, then opened his notebook. Inside were scribbled notes for a keynote titled, "Power, Grace, and the Right to Sit with Respect." Across the country, Hannah Monroe now worked for a nonprofit that trained customer service staff in cultural sensitivity and crisis empathy. She didn't hide what happened to her. She led with it. "This is what I did," she often began her talks. "And this is what I learned. Because someone gave me the consequence I needed and the grace I didn't deserve." Her story became part of the training curriculum across 6 airlines. She wasn't proud of her past, but she used it to build a better future as the plane soared above the clouds. Elijah looked outside and whispered something he hadn't said in years. Not since the days when he had to fight just to be invited into the room. Now he built the rooms, he whispered. "Thank you for the moldy bread." Because it was never just about what was on the plate. It was about who they thought was sitting behind it.